Have you ever underestimated someone based on their job or appearance? Anaya, a humble cleaning lady, worked for a big corporation and was dismissed by those around her. But little did they know her intelligence and determination into this incredible story. Anaya had worked at one of the biggest corporations in the city for 10 years, doing the same tasks every day, sweeping floors, emptying trash cans, wiping down surfaces, and making sure the building sparkled by the time the employees walked in. She was the first to arrive in the morning and the last to leave at night for most of her colleagues. Anaya was just a cleaning lady, a face they saw but never really noticed to them. She was part of the background, like the furniture or the walls. No one knew anything about her life, her dreams, or her past. They did not care to know either. They passed by her with a glance, maybe a nod if they were feeling polite, but rarely a word. Even the executives who Anaya saw most often barely acknowledged her existence. They came in and out of the building in their sharp suits on their phones or discussing important business deals. She was just the help, someone doing a job they could not be bothered with. But Anaya was more than just the woman holding the mop. She paid attention to everything around her, observing and learning as she cleaned working late at night after everyone had left. She often overheard conversations in the boardrooms, the executives assuming she was not listening or would not understand. Spoke freely around her. They talked about business strategies, company profits, and financial decisions. They discussed who was getting promoted and who was being let go. Anaya listened carefully to all of it. She picked up on things no one else noticed, because to them she was invisible over the years. Anaya developed a deep understanding of the company's operations. She knew the employees, the structure, and even some of the more confidential issues happening behind closed doors. And although she had no formal role in the business side of things, Anaya's sharp mind allowed her to piece together what was happening within the company, good and bad. In addition to her duties, Anaya had a natural gift for paying attention to detail. While she made sure every corner of the office was spotless, her mind was always active. Cleaning gave her time to think. She often pondered over the company's affairs, wondering about the decisions the executives made and how it all worked. But of course, no one ever asked for her opinion. No one cared that Anaya might actually know more than they gave her credit for. Anaya wasn't bitter about her job. In fact, she was proud of her work. She came from a background where hard work was valued, and she knew she was providing for her family through her dedication. She did not seek approval from the executive or employees. Yet she could not help but notice the stark difference in how people treated her. Most of them seemed to think that just because she wore a cleaning uniform, she was not capable of anything else. They did not know she had once held a different career, one that required intelligence and skill. They could not imagine that this cleaning lady quietly doing her job had a mind sharp enough to catch on to things they could not see. But Anaya remembered a time when things were different years ago. She had been in the corporate world herself, working as a financial analyst at a smaller company. She had spent years studying numbers, analyzing markets, and making business decisions. However, life had not always been kind to her. A family tragedy forced her to leave her promising career and take up a job that offered steady hours and an immediate paycheck, cleaning. It was the only work she could find at the time, and even though it was not what she had dreamed of, Anaya took pride in doing it well. Though her career took a turn, Anaya never let go of the analytical part of her mind. Her eye for detail stayed sharp, and she kept up with the world of finance, reading articles and following market trends in her spare time. Over the years, she'd learned that knowledge was power, and although she was not in a position of authority anymore, her understanding of business had never left her. So when Anaya overheard employees discussing sensitive issues within the company, her ears perked up. She noticed financial reports left on desks, glanced at charts on white bars, and started seeing a troubling pattern emerge. The numbers she saw did not seem right, and it made her suspicious. She was not able to say anything. Of course, she was the cleaning lady who would listen to her. But something in the way the company was operating bothered her as she continued her daily routine. Anaya noticed more and more inconsistencies. She was not snooping. Everything she observed was right in front of her because people simply did not think twice about what they left out in the open. Whether it was a misplaced financial document or a whispered conversation in the hallway, Anaya soaked in the information like a sponge. She knew something was not right within the company, and it was only a matter of time before things fell apart. the employees and executives never thought twice about Anaya. They did not realize she was not only cleaning their offices, but also quietly figuring out the company's inner workings to them. She was a simple woman doing a simple job, but Anaya was becoming more and more aware that the company she had worked at for years was heading for trouble. And she, the unnoticed cleaning lady, was the only one who seemed to realize it. Mikhail was a man who commanded respect. Whether people liked it or not, he had worked hard to build the company from scratch. And in his eyes, no one understood its value as much as he did. His leadership style was cold and cutthroat while the company thrived. Under his direction, it came at a price. Mikhail believed success was not just about making money. It was about maintaining control. And he did not tolerate mistakes. Employees were afraid of him, and for good reason. He had fired people from minor errors, humiliating them in front of their peers before showing them the door. Mikhail thrived on power. He saw everyone in his company as either an asset or a liability, and he had little patience for those who could not meet his standards. The higher-ups and echoed his attitude following his lead. They treated those beneath them with the same indifference. To Mikhail, Anaya was no different. She was simply part of the background, a person with no influence. No power, in fact. He barely even saw her as a person, more like a tool that kept his office clean and shiny. One morning, as Anaya polished the floor in the lobby, Mikhail walked through the building on his way to an important meeting. His expensive leather shoes clicked on the freshly cleaned marble, the sound echoing in the quiet space. He glanced down at Anaya, who was diligently working, and smirked. He did not say a word, just a passing expression of superiority that lasted no more than a second to him. Anaya was invisible, just another face he would forget as soon as he walked away. This was not an isolated incident. Mikhail's casual disregard for the people who worked below him was evident in the way he carried himself to him. The cleaning staff, receptionists, and other lower-level employees were mere cogs in the machine he had built. They did not deserve his attention, nor did they need it. His focus was on bigger things, growing the company, making more money, and maintaining his position at the top during a company gala. One evening, a group of junior executives stood around laughing and chatting about office gossip. The event was lavish, with champagne flowing and the sound of jazz music filling the room. Mikhail, who had been entertaining some of the company's biggest investors, happened to pass by the group, just as they began joking about Anaya. One of them, with a chuckle, remarked, "She has been here forever. Probably does not even dream of being anything more than the cleaning lady." The others laughed, finding amusement in the idea that Anaya would never escape her job. They viewed her as nothing more than a fixture, someone destined to clean their offices for as long as she could walk. Mikhail, overhearing their conversation, joined in with a small, dismissive chuckle of his own. To him, the idea of someone like Anaya rising above her station seemed absurd. She was just the help after all. He did not even give it a second thought. Little did he know that the very woman he was laughing at would soon be at the center of the company's biggest shakeup. Mikhail's arrogance was not just limited to how he treated lower-level employees. He ran the company with an iron fist, believing that his decisions were always right. He did not take suggestions lightly, and he certainly did not welcome criticism. The board members and executives who worked closely with him were careful never to question his judgment. Mikhail's word was final. If anyone dared to challenge him, they quickly found themselves out of a job. This unyielding attitude had made him many enemies over the years. But Mikhail did not care. In his mind, he was untouchable. The company was thriving, and if the profits continued to roll in, nothing else mattered. However, what Mikhail did not realize was that his focus on control and power had blinded him to the real issues festering beneath the surface. The company he had built, once stable and successful, was beginning to show cracks. Financial mismanagement, hidden by the very executives he trusted, was threatening the foundation of everything he had worked for. Mikhail, though brilliant in his early years, had become complacent. He believed he knew everything there was to know about his business. But he had distanced himself from the day-to-day operations. He did not see the warning signs. And because he dismissed the lower-level employees like Anaya, he was unaware of how much she had seen, how much she knew, as Anaya quietly did her work unnoticed by the likes of Mikhail and the other executives. She observed more than they could ever imagine. She knew the company better than most. She saw the waste, the mismanagement, and the risky financial decisions that were being made. She listened to conversations that were not meant for her ears and saw documents left carelessly on desks. Anaya did not need to be acknowledged by people like Michal. To understand the inner workings of the company, she had all the information she needed, while Michal based in his power, believing himself to be invincible. Anaya was piecing together a puzzle that even the CEO could not see. She watched as executives made poor decisions and covered up their mistakes. She saw the nervous glances exchanged during meetings and overheard whispered conversations about missing funds and upcoming layoffs. And while Michal smirked at her as if she were insignificant, Anaya was quietly gathering the information that would ultimately lead to his downfall in the boardroom. Michal commanded attention. His presence was intimidating, his voice firm and authoritative. He believed that the company's success was a direct result of his leadership, and in many ways that was true. But what he did not realize was that his ER had blinded him to the truth. The empire he had built was slowly crumbling from within, and he was too busy maintaining his image of power to notice Michal continued to believe that those beneath him posed no threat, least of all a cleaning lady. But as the days went by, Anaya was uncovering more and more about the company's precarious situation. She did not need anyone's recognition or approval. She was not looking for praise or validation. She was simply someone who saw the truth and knew how to act on it. And while Michal and his executives laughed and dismissed her as just the cleaning lady, Anaya quietly held the key to the company's future. Her knowledge, her observations, and her understanding of what was happening would soon come to light. And when it did, it would change everything. Anaya, the woman everyone thought was just a cleaning lady, carried with her a wealth of knowledge and experience that no one could have guessed before life forced her into a different path. Anaya had been a financial analyst at a small but growing firm. She had studied markets, crunched numbers, and advised on investment decisions. She had been good at it too. Her sharp mind could detect patterns others missed, and she had a knack for solving financial puzzles. But life, as it often does, throw her curveball. Personal tragedies hit Anaya hard, forcing her to leave her promising career behind. Family came first, and when tragedy struck, she needed a steady job that would allow her to support them immediately. Cleaning was the only job she could find at the time, and though it was not what she had envisioned for herself, she took it without complaint. She had mouths to feed and bills to pay, and she was not afraid of hard work. Still, the analytical part of her mind never rested in her spare time. Anaya kept up with the business world. She subscribed to financial newsletters, read reports online, and followed market trends, even as she scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans. Her mind was always active. She knew the language of finance, understood the flow of money, and could decipher the numbers behind a company's success or failure. It was a skill she never lost, even though her life had taken a different turn. As Anaya went about her cleaning rounds at the company, she could not help but notice certain things that others overlooked. Executives and employees often left financial reports and spreadsheets lying around on their desks, or even pinned to bulletin boards to them. These papers were just part of their daily work, and they assumed no one would understand their significance. But to Anaya, these documents were much more than scraps of paper. They were clues, and she knew exactly how to read them. One day, while dusting the office of a junior executive, Anaya spotted a quarterly financial report left out in the open. She glanced at it briefly and noticed something odd. The revenue figures did not align with the expense projections she had seen earlier on another desk. Curious, she looked closer. The numbers were not just inconsistent, they were completely off to someone without financial expertise. It might have seemed like a simple mistake, but Anaya's trained eye knew better. This was not a mistake. It was a red flag over the following weeks. Anaya continued to notice similar inconsistencies. Different departments had reports that didn't match, and the figures in some of the internal documents seemed too inflated. She remembered one particularly concerning document she'd seen in the office of the chief financial officer. The projections for the next quarter looked overly optimistic, given the current financial climate. Anaya knew enough to recognize that this wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. It was something far worse. Financial mismanagement. Anaya's mind raced. She began piecing together the fragments of information she had gathered during her cleaning shifts. The numbers were telling a story that no one else seemed to be paying attention to. The company was heading for serious trouble, and it wasn't just a matter of poor management. There was something more deliberate going on. Funds were being allocated in ways that didn't make sense, and expenses were piling up faster than the company could handle. If things continued in this direction, the company was on a collision course with financial disaster. Despite the mounting evidence she was uncovering, Anaya knew she couldn't simply go to someone and tell them what she had found. Who would believe her? She was the cleaning lady, after all. She doubted anyone in the company would even give her the time of day, let alone listen to her concerns about the finances. Yet she couldn't stand by and watch the company collapse, especially when she knew she could help Anaya begin keeping notes, writing down the details she saw in the reports left out in the open, and comparing them to the documents she came across in other offices. She kept track of the discrepancies, the inflated projections, and the troubling patterns that kept surfacing. Her notes started to paint a clearer picture of what was happening within the company. The financial mismanagement wasn't just a small oversight, it was systemic. There were layers of bad decisions, from overspending on unnecessary projects to hiding losses in the accounting books. As the weeks passed, Anaya's concern grew. The company executives were either unaware of what was happening, or they were deliberately covering it up to protect their own interests. She couldn't tell which it was yet, but she knew one thing for certain: the company was heading for a crisis, and if nothing was done, it would implode. The financial ruin would be devastating not just for the executives, but for all the employees who relied on the company for their livelihoods. One evening, as Anaya finished her cleaning rounds, she sat quietly in the break room thinking about everything she had discovered. The company was on the verge of a financial collapse, and no one seemed to see it coming. She wondered how long it would be before the truth surfaced, before the numbers caught up to the lies and everything came crashing down. She had the knowledge and skills to do something about it, but she was trapped in the role of a cleaning lady, a role where no one expected her to have the answers. But Anya wasn't the type of person to give up easily. Her past experiences had taught her to be resilient, to push forward, even when the odds were stacked against her. She knew that just because she was seen as the help didn't mean she was helpless. The situation was dire, but Anaya also understood that she had a unique advantage. No one was watching her. Everyone in the company had underestimated her, and that gave her the element of surprise as she pondered her next move. Anaya realized that the fate of the company and possibly her own future rested in her hands. The question now was, what would she do with the knowledge she had uncovered? Would she continue to be the invisible cleaning lady, or would she find a way to reveal the truth? Even if it meant stepping out of the shadows, the time for cleaning up other people's messes was coming to an end. Now it was time for Anaya to clean up something much bigger, a financial disaster waiting to happen. Anaya continued to move through the company unnoticed, as she had for the past 15 years. But now her purpose was different. She wasn't just cleaning floors or taking out the trash. She was observing, listening, and gathering information. Every conversation, every document left out in the open became part of a larger puzzle. She was slowly piecing together the irregularities in the financial reports she'd noticed earlier weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a broader issue that went deep into the core of the company. Employees were hiding losses, manipulating figures, and engaging in risky deals that no one seemed willing to confront. And all the while, the company marched toward financial ruin. Anaya had started keeping detailed notes. She documented everything: discrepancies in financial records, suspicious conversations she overheard, and shady deals hinted at during closed-door meetings. She knew that what she was uncovering was dangerous, and she wasn't naive enough to think she could just march into an executive's office and expose the truth without solid evidence. No one would take her seriously. Worse, they might turn on her, accuse her of snooping, or even fire her. So Anaya remained silent, playing the part of the invisible cleaning lady. While quietly building a case every day during her cleaning shifts, Anaya listened to the conversations that flowed around her. Executives spoke openly in the hallways, assuming she wasn't paying attention. They discussed business strategies, future earnings reports, and the company's public image. But underneath their confident talk, Anaya could hear the anxiety in their voices, the nervous undertones they tried to hide. They knew things weren't going well. They just didn't realize how bad it truly was. One conversation in particular caught Anaya's attention. She was cleaning near the executive boardroom late one night when two senior managers walked by deep in discussion. They were talking about the upcoming quarterly earnings report, but their tone was tense. One of them mentioned that the numbers didn't look good, and they'd have to adjust the report to make it seem like the company was performing better than it actually was. Anaya's ears perked up at the worst. She knew exactly what that meant. They were planning to cover up the losses as the men walked away unaware of her presence. Anaya's mind raced. She had already suspected that the company was hiding its financial troubles, but this confirmed it. Executives were deliberately manipulating the numbers to present a false image to investors and the public. It wasn't just mismanagement anymore, it was fraud. If they continued down this path, the entire company would eventually collapse, and it would take hundreds of employees down with it. But worse than that, Mara realized that if the truth came out, the company's leadership could face legal consequences over the next few weeks. Anaya paid even closer attention to the inner workings of the company. She noticed that certain employees were working late, always in secretive meetings or rushing to cover their tracks. Financial reports were being revised at the last minute, and expenses were being buried in obscure places within the budget. She overheard executives discussing off-the-books deals, partnerships that weren't properly documented, and inflated earnings that had no basis in reality. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a company in trouble. It was a company on the edge of implosion. Michalta's CE remained blissfully unaware of the chaos happening under his nose. His arrogance blinded him to the warning signs, and he continued to run the company as if everything was going perfectly. He spoke in grand terms about expansion plans and future investments, completely ignorant of the fact that his empire was built on lies. His confidence in his own leadership was unshakable, and no one dared to tell him the truth. After all, Michal wasn't the kind of man you questioned. Anya watched him from a distance day after day as he breezed through the office, shaking hands with investors, giving motivational speeches to his staff, and smiling for the cameras. His obliviousness was staggering. How could someone so smart, so successful, not see what was happening right in front of him? Anaya found herself torn. Part of her wanted to let it all fall apart. The arrogance, the disregard for the people who kept the company running, the blind faith in their own infallibility. It all seemed destined for failure. Maybe they deserved it. But Anya wasn't just a silent observer. She was someone who understood the stakes. She knew that if the company collapsed, it wouldn't just be the executives who paid the price. Hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with the financial cover-ups would lose their jobs. Families would be hurt. The fallout would ripple far beyond the boardroom, and despite everything, Anya felt a sense of responsibility. She had the knowledge and the skills to help, and ignoring that felt wrong. Anaya's internal conflict grew with each passing day. She knew she could expose the truth, but she also knew that doing so could put her at risk. The executives had no reason to trust her or even believe her, and if she made a wrong move, it could all backfire. But at the same time, staying quiet wasn't an option anymore. The company's collapse was no longer a distant possibility. It was a ticking time bomb, and someone had to act before it was too late as the weeks wore on. Anaya continued gathering her information, her notebook filling with details, figures, and patterns. She wasn't just collecting random pieces of data anymore. She was building a case. Each note she made brought her closer to understanding in the full scope of the company's financial disaster. And as she connected more dots, the picture became clearer. The executives were involved in more than just shady deals. They were committing fraud on a massive scale, hiding their losses from investors and gambling with the company's future. And yet, despite the danger, Anaya didn't feel fear. Instead, she felt a growing sense of purpose. She had worked in this company for 15 years, seen it grow from the ground up, and now she was the only one who truly knew what was happening behind the scenes. The employees continued to laugh at her, dismissing her as the cleaning lady. But they had no idea that Anaya held the company's future in her hands. She had two choices. She could let the company crash, watching from the sidelines as the empire crumbled around them, or she could step forward, use the knowledge she had gained, and try to save the company from itself. As Anaya moved silently through Peter Grant's office that evening, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. The CFO had always seemed distant and calculating, but she had never been able to pin down what exactly was off about him. Until now, the binder sitting on his desk, left carelessly open, practically begged her to look inside. Her eyes darted around the room to make sure she was alone. No one would question why the cleaning lady was there. But this was different. What Anaya was about to uncover was bigger than any mess she'd ever cleaned up. She glanced quickly at the page before her, and the pit in her stomach deepened. The numbers were damning expenses that had no justification, funds being funneled into obscure accounts. And worst of all, clear signs that Peter had been skimming money to cover up the company's financial failures. It was worse than she had imagined. The company wasn't just in trouble. It was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, and Peter was doing everything he could to hide it. If this information leaked, hundreds of employees would lose their jobs. Ishins would be wiped out, and lives would be shattered. Anaya's pulse quickened. Her mind raced as she thought about the implications. This wasn't just about some shady financial practices anymore. This was about the livelihoods of people she saw every day. The receptionists, the janitorial staff, the hard-working employees who had no idea their futures were hanging by a thread. She knew she had to do something. But the question weighed heavily on her. How could she, a mere cleaning lady in the eyes of the executives, take down a CFO and expose a cover-up that ran this deep the next morning? Anaya made a decision. She couldn't stay silent any longer, but she had to be smart about how she acted. Confronting Peter directly would be dangerous, and going to McCarthy's CEO seemed equally risky. He was blind to the mess happening around him, and too arrogant to listen to someone like her. But Anaya had something most people didn't. She knew how to blend into the background. She had been observing the company for years, and she knew exactly how to deliver a message without drawing attention to herself. That afternoon, Anaya took a calculated risk. She typed out an anonymous letter detailing everything she had discovered about the financial discrepancies within the company. She was careful not to reveal too much at once, knowing that her credibility depended on how the information was received. She didn't need to overwhelm Mikhail with every detail. She just needed to get his attention, to make him take a closer look at what was happening right under his nose. In the letter, Anaya outlined the major red flags, the inconsistencies in the financial reports, the suspicious accounts Peter had been managing, and the looming bankruptcy that no one else seemed to notice. She wrote with precision, making sure every point was clear but without giving away who she was. It wasn't safe for her to reveal her identity. Just yet, after all, if Peter or any of the other executives found out who was behind the letter, her job and possibly her safety would be at risk. Anaya printed the letter and carefully placed it in an envelope. She waited until the office was mostly empty, then made her way to Mikhail's office. His desk was cluttered with papers and reports, but she knew where he always placed his important documents. The spot he checked first thing in the morning with a deep breath. Anaya left the envelope right on top of his stack of reports, ensuring it would be the first thing he saw when he arrived the next day. As she left the office that night, her mind was racing. Would Mikhail even read the letter? And if he did, would he take it seriously? There was no telling how he would react. For all Anaya knew, he might dismiss it as nonsense, or worse, see it as an attempt to undermine his authority. But deep down, Anaya hoped that the truth in her words would be enough to get through to him. She had done her part. The rest was up to Mikhail. The following morning, Anaya went about her usual routine, cleaning offices and making sure everything was in order. But her mind was elsewhere, fixated on what might be happening in the CEO's office. At that very moment, was Mikhail reading the letter? Was he putting the pieces together, realizing that his company was in far more trouble than he'd ever imagined? Or had he simply tossed it aside, too confident in his leadership to believe that something so disastrous could be happening under his watch? Anaya couldn't afford to be seen as nervous or suspicious, so she forced herself to maintain her usual demeanor, blending into the background as she always did. But as the hours ticked by, she couldn't help but wonder if her anonymous warning had made any difference. Later that afternoon, while cleaning near the executive offices, Anaya overheard something that gave her hope. Mikhail's assistant was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. "He's furious," she whispered. "Something's come up in the financials. He's called an emergency meal with the board." Anaya's heart skipped a beat. The letter had worked. Michal had seen the warning, and now action was being taken. It was just the beginning. But Anayak knew that once Michal started digging, the truth would eventually come to light. Peter's days of skimming money and covering up the company's failures were numbered. Still, Anaya didn't feel relief just yet. She knew that even though the wheels were in motion, it was a long road ahead. The executives were powerful, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. But Anaya had done what she could to sound the alarm. Now it was a matter of watching carefully, staying one step ahead, and making sure the company didn't implode before the truth could be fully exposed. As the office buzzed with tension in the following days, Anaya kept her head down, listening, observing, and quietly preparing for whatever might come next. She knew she had started something that couldn't be undone, but she also knew that the real battle was just beginning. The company's survival and her own future hung in the balance. Mikkel sat in his office, staring blankly at the wall. The crumpled letter still lying on his desk. 4 days, he had dismissed the anonymous warning as the work of a disgruntled employee or some baseless rumor meant to cause trouble who would dare question his leadership. He had built this company from the ground up, made it a financial powerhouse. But something in the tone of the letter had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Still, Mikal wasn't the kind of man to act on anonymous accusations. He believed in hard facts, not whispers in the dark. However, as the days passed, Mikal began noticing small but concerning details that aligned with the claims. In the letter, reports that should have been signed off weren't numbers that once balanced perfectly started to look off. He brushed off the initial feeling, chalking it up to coincidence. Yet each day, the nagging doubt grew stronger. He tried to ignore it, but his instincts, honed from years of running the company, told him something wasn't right. The letter, though, anonymous, had been precise too. Precise to ignore any longer. Reluctantly, Michal ordered an internal investigation. He didn't tell anyone what had prompted it, not even his closest advisors if there were issues he wanted to know without tipping anyone off. It was a move that shocked the senior management team. Michal had always been confident, perhaps overconfident in the stability of his empire. But now, in the quiet of his office, the certainty that had once been his greatest asset felt like a double-edged sword. The internal auditors worked quickly, and it didn't take long for the first cracks to appear. The initial findings were troubling. There were inconsistencies in the financial reports dating back several years. A deeper dive revealed even more startling truths. Some of the company's biggest deals had been poorly structured, leaving the company exposed to massive financial risk. Hidden losses were being concealed in obscure corners of the budget, while profits were inflated to keep investors happy. But the most damning discovery was tied directly to Peter Grant, the CFO. Peter, it turned out, had been embezzling money for years. He had funneled funds into personal accounts using complex accounting tricks to hide his tracks. Worse still, he had orchestrated fraudulent schemes that artificially inflated the company's performance, deceiving shareholders and employees alike. The company wasn't just in trouble. It was on the verge of collapse. The mountain of debt and financial mismanagement that Peter had buried was finally about to topple. Michal was furious. He called for Peter immediately, but the confrontation was anything but satisfying. Peter tried to deflect, insisting that it was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence was undeniable. Michal, shaken to his core, had no choice but to fire Peter on the spot. As Peter walked out of the building for the last time, Michal felt a mix of anger and humiliation. How had he, the man who prided himself on being in control, missed all of this? The investigation continued, uncovering layers upon layers of deceit. Michal couldn't help but feel blindsided, his confidence shattered. He had always seen himself as a strong leader, someone who could spot problems before they spiraled out of control. But this was something he had never anticipated. The company, his life's work, was teetering on the edge of ruin, and it had taken an anonymous letter to alert him to the truth. As Michal reviewed the final report, he realized the depth of the crisis. Not only had Peter been stealing from the company, but his fraudulent financial practices had placed the entire business in jeopardy. If the truth came out publicly, the company's stock would plummet, investors would flee, and the company could face criminal charges. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And the worst part was Mikhail knew that if it hadn't been for that letter, he would have walked straight into it blind. But the question that haunted Mikhail was simple. Who had sent the letter? The investigation had turned up no clues. Whoever had tipped him off had been careful, leaving no trace of their identity. The precision of the details suggested someone close to the financial operations of the company. But Mikhail couldn't pinpoint who it might be. The anonymous whistleblower had saved his company, possibly even saved his career, and yet he had no idea who to thank. Mikhail replayed the events of the past few days over and over in his mind, searching for a clue, something he might have missed. He even considered calling in the police to track down the letter's author. But what would that achieve? Whoever had sent the letter clearly didn't want to be known. They hadn't come forward to claim credit. They had simply acted to stop the company from collapsing. Mikhail knew he had to respect that. But even as the investigation wrapped up and the company began taking steps to recover, the mystery lingered. Mikhail couldn't let go of the idea that someone, an unseen hand, had been watching the company closely for a long time. The attention to detail in the letter wasn't the work of an outsider. This was someone who knew the company inside and out, who had been following its every move, observing the financial irregularities before they spiraled out of control over the next few weeks. As the board scrambled to implement damage control and reassure investors, Mikhail found himself growing more and more obsessed with finding out the identity of the anonymous whistleblower. He discreetly asked around, probing his senior staff, but no one had any idea. Some executives speculated that it could have been a disgruntled employee, but Mikhail knew better. This wasn't about revenge. It was about saving the company as days turned into weeks. Mikhail couldn't shake the feeling that the person who had saved his company was still close by, quietly watching as everything unfolded. It was a strange, humbling realization for all his power and authority. It had been someone far from the top ranks who had seen the danger. Before he did, someone who had understood the stakes and acted when no one else would. But for now, the identity of the whistleblower remained a mystery, and Mikhail could do nothing but be thankful that someone somewhere had cared enough to act when he hadn't. And while the company began to stabilize, the question that gnawed at Mikhail's mind persisted. Who was the silent hero who had saved him from his own blindness? Mikhail sat at his desk, his mind still racing from the fallout of the investigation. The company was slowly stabilizing, but the damage left behind by Peter's schemes would take time to repair. Then, out of the blue, he received a meeting request from Anayathe. Cleaning lady confusion mixed with curiosity. What could she possibly want? It was unusual for someone in her position to request a private meeting with the CEO, but something about the look in her eyes when she approached him earlier that day made Mikhail hesitate. There was a quiet confidence in her, something he hadn't noticed before. Reluctantly, he agreed to the meeting, intrigued but unsure of what to expect that evening as the office quieted and the lights dimmed. Anaya walked into Mikhail's expansive office with a calmness that caught him off guard. She wasn't intimidated by the grandeur of the place, nor by the man sitting behind the large mahogany desk. In fact, as Mikhail observed her, he realized she seemed completely in control, like she knew exactly what she was doing. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Mr. Ellis Anaya Begin." Her voice steady, she held a small folder in her hands, and as she sat down, she placed it on his desk. Mikhail leaned forward, still puzzled by the situation. "What can I do for you?" Anayahe asked, keeping his tone neutral. Though the confusion was clear in his eyes, he had seen her around the building for years, but never once had he considered that she might have something to say about the company's affairs. Anaya didn't waste any time. She opened the folder and revealed a stack of neatly organized documents. Financial reports, transaction histories, and detailed notes that Mikhail immediately recognized as critical to the investigation. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. These were the very discrepancies the investigators had uncovered, but the level of detail in Anaya's notes was even more precise than their findings. "I've been watching for a long time," Anaya said softly, watching Mikhail's reaction carefully. "I noticed things weren't adding up at first. I thought it was just a mistake. But then I saw the same patterns over and over again. Michal's hands froze over the papers. His mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. "You knew about this," he stammered, still in disbelief. Anaya nodded. "For months now. I used to work as a financial analyst before I took this job. Circumstances changed, but my ability to read numbers didn't. I recognized the red flags in your reports, the ones left lying around on desks. I didn't want to jump to conclusions without solid evidence, so I started taking notes, collecting everything I could. And then, when I realized how serious it was, I sent you that anonymous letter." Michal leaned back in his chair. Air stunned into silence. The anonymous letter, the one that had sparked the entire investigation, had come from Anaya. The cleaning lady he'd barely acknowledged for years had seen the signs long before anyone else had. It was as if the room tilted, the power dynamics shifting in a way Mikhail had never anticipated for the first time in his career. He felt vulnerable in the presence of someone far removed from his world of corporate elites. Anaya continued, unfazed by his S. "I didn't come here to threaten you or demand anything, Mr. Ellis. But I believe we can help each other. You're in a difficult position, and I have information that could assist you in stabilizing the company before things get worse." Mikhail's mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. The irony of the situation was almost too much to bear. The person who had saved his company from ruin was the one he had overlooked for years. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Anaya smiled, slightly sensing the shift in his tone. "I'm not asking for much. I want an opportunity. I know this company better than anyone realizes, and I've proven that I have the skills to contribute in ways no one expected. All I'm asking for is a chance to use those skills in a role that reflects my abilities. Not just my job title." Mikhail stared at her, his mind swirling with thoughts. The woman sitting in front of him wasn't the person he had assumed her to be. She wasn't just the cleaning lady. She was someone with the intellect, the foresight, and the audacity to expose a scandal that could have destroyed everything he had built. And now she was offering him a solution, one that came with a personal request, but one that made perfect sense given the circumstances. He leaned forward, rubbing his temples as he tried to gather his thoughts. "You want a position in the company?" he asked, still trying to wrap his head around everything after all this time. Anaya nodded again, her voice calm and steady. "I've been patient, Mr. Ellis. I never expected anything from this company other than a paycheck, but I can't stand by and watch it fall apart when I know I can help. I've proven that I understand the numbers. The risks give me a chance, and I'll help you rebuild it." Michal's mind raced. He had already lost so much trust in his executives' confidence in the company's stability. But here was Anaya, presenting him with an opportunity to turn things around. She was right. She had proven herself more capable than many of the people he had trusted for years. The audacity of the request both unsettled and impressed him. After a long pause, Michal spoke. "If what you're saying is true, and you've already helped save this company from the brink, then maybe it's time I started seeing people for who they really are, not just what position they hold." He exhaled slowly, the weight of his realization pressing down on him. "Anaya, if you're willing to work with me, I'll make sure you get the chance you're asking for." Anaya's smile widened just a little. She had known this moment would come eventually. Ever since she sent the letter, she had prepared for it. Now the future was in her hands, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny again. Michal stood up and extended his hand, and Anaya took it. In that moment, the balance of power shifted again. But this time, it was one of mutual respect. The woman had overlooked for years was now the person who could help save his company and perhaps even his reputation. As Anaya left the office that night, she knew that things would never be the same. The cleaning lady who had once been invisible was now at the center of the company's recovery, and the road ahead, though uncertain, was one she was more than ready to walk. Mikhail sat in his office, staring out of the window, his world crumbling around him, the weight of the investigation, the revelations about Peter P's betrayal. And now Anaya's unexpected rise all hung over him like a dark cloud he had always believed himself to be. untouchable, the driving force behind the company's success. But now he realized how wrong he had been. He had failed to notice the corruption under his nose, and it had taken a cleaning lady Anayato open his eyes. And now she had come to him with a choice that he never thought he'd face. Anaya's demeanor hadn't changed from when she first walked into his office. She still spoke with the same calm authority. But now there was a firmness in her words that Mikhail couldn't ignore. The company wasn't out of the woods yet, and while Peter Grant had been fired, Anya knew that Mikhail's leadership, or lack thereof, was part of the problem. She had seen firsthand how his arrogance, his blindness to the reality of the company's situation, had allowed things to spiral out of control. Mikhail, despite everything, couldn't believe what he was hearing. A cleaning lady was giving him an ultimatum. The idea seemed absurd, almost laughable. But as Anaya stood before him, presenting the final piece of evidence, she had gathered documents that showed Mikhail's direct negligence in ignoring the company's financial mismanagement. He realized that the power dynamics had shifted irreversibly. Anaya held all the cards. "Now I'm not here to ruin you, Mr. Ellis." Anaya sighed, her voice calm but firm. "I could have gone public with this a long time ago, but I didn't. I gave you the chance to save this company, and I've helped you do that. But if things are really going to change, you need to." St. Down Mikhail's face hardened. He wasn't a man used to being told what to do, especially not by someone like Anaya. "You think you can just walk in here and take over?" He asked, his voice laced with anger. "Do you have any idea what it takes to run a company like this?" Anaya didn't flinch. She had anticipated his reaction, but she wasn't backing down. "I know what it takes to see the truth, Mr. Ellis. And right now, this company needs leadership that can face that truth. You've built this business, yes, but you've also turned a blind eye to the very people who helped make it what it is. That's why things got so bad. You can't see beyond your own success, and that's what led us here." Mikhail's jaw clenched as he struggled to hold on to his pride. "And you think you're the one to fix it?" "I'm not asking to take your place," Annie replied calmly. I don't need to be but the board will listen to me if I go public with what I have. I've already saved this company from collapsing now. I'm asking you to do the right thing. Step down and let someone else lead, someone who can restore trust in this company's future." There was a long silence between them. Mikhail's mind raced. He had always been in control, always made the tough decisions. Now he was faced with a choice that didn't feel like his own. The thought of stepping down from the company he had built with his own hands felt like a death sentence. But the reality was inescapable. Anaya was right. If he refused, the scandal would destroy everything. The board would oust him. The media would devour him, and the company's stock would plummet. Anaya's evidence was enough to ruin him, and she knew it. He felt the walls closing in the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He, the powerful SE, was now at the mercy of the woman he had ignored for years. The same woman who had overheard boardroom conversations while mopping the floors, who had pieced together the company's financial downfall, and who had ultimately saved it from destruction. And now she was the one giving him an ultimatum he couldn't refuse. With a heavy sigh, Mikhail finally broke. "The silence. If I step down, what happens next?" Anaya's eyes softened slightly, but her resolve remained. "The company will survive. The board will choose a new someone who understands the importance of every part of this business. Not just the bottom line. I'll stay on to ensure the transition goes smoothly, but the board will need to know that real change is happening." Mikhail stared at her, his mind reeling. He had spent years building his empire only to see it slipping away in a matter of days, but deep down he knew Anaya was right. His time as CEO was over. His arrogance had blinded him, and it was time for new leadership. Someone who could rebuild the company's reputation from the ground up. "Fine," he said quietly, the words almost catching in his throat. "I'll step down, but not because you forced me. I'm doing this for the company, Anaya Gave." A slight nod, recognizing the need for him to preserve some sense of dignity in this moment. That's all anyone could ask for. Mikhail stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. The view that had once given him a sense of power and control now felt distant, like a world that was no longer his. For years, he had been the face of the company, the man behind its success. But in the end, it was the quiet, unnoticed cleaning lady who had saved it from falling apart as Anaya turned to leave. Mikhail spoke one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. How did I miss all of this? Anaya paused at the door, her hand resting on the knob. You weren't looking, she said, simply, and with that, she left the room, leaving Mikhail alone with his thoughts. The next morning, news of Mikhail Ellis's resignation spread like wildfire through the company. Some were shocked, others relieved, but all knew that a new era was beginning. Anaya's role remained a secret to most, but those who needed to know, the board key executives, understood that she had been instrumental in saving the company from disaster. As Mikhail quietly exited the building he had once ruled, Anaya stayed behind, ready to help guide the company through it. Next chapter, the cleaning lady who had been invisible for so long was now the most powerful person in the company. Even without the title of SEAL, Anaya's transition into her new role in the company's financial department was anything but smooth. But she welcomed the challenges that came her way. With her extensive knowledge of finance and her keen eye for detail, she quickly became a crucial player in the company's recovery. The executives, once too proud to see her value, now looked to her for guidance and insight, seeking her input on important financial decisions. The transformation was remarkable, and it ignited a spark of hope within her as the restructuring unfolded. Anaya was determined to foster a culture of transparency and accountability. She organized workshops for employees at all levels, emphasizing the importance of ethical behavior and open communication. These sessions allowed employees to voice their concerns and share their ideas, creating an environment where everyone felt empowered to contribute. The executives who had once dismissed her were now attending her workshops, realizing that their previous attitudes had only perpetuated the toxic culture that had nearly brought the company down. Meanwhile, Anaya initiated a mentorship program aimed at supporting underprivileged employees. She understood firsthand how easily one could be overlooked based on their job title or background. Through this program, she provided guidance to younger employees, sharing her story and encouraging them to pursue their aspirations. It wasn't just about building a better company. It was about building a community where everyone had the chance to succeed. The company began to flourish under Anaya's leadership. Sales increased, employee morale improved, and clients regained confidence in the brand. The board of directors, who had initially been skeptical about the new direction, soon became staunch supporters of Anaya's vision. They recognized her ability to see beyond numbers and profit mark. She understood the human element of business, the importance of nurturing relationships both internally and externally. Anaya's reputation grew, and soon she was invited to speak at industry conferences. She shared her insights about resilience, the significance of diversity in the workplace, and the lessons she had learned throughout her journey. Her story resonated with many, inspiring others to believe in their potential, regardless of their circumstances. As she stood on stage, addressing an audience filled with aspiring professionals, she reflected on how far she had come despite the success. Anaya remained humble. She often recalled the days spent cleaning offices, the laughter of executives who had once dismissed her, and the painful realities of her past. Instead of dwelling on resentment, she focused on gratitude for the opportunity to make a difference, for the support of her colleagues, and for the lessons learned. Along the way, her efforts did not go unnoticed. The company was awarded several accolades for its turnaround, and Anaya was recognized as a leader in the industry. The media hailed her as a success story and interviews poured in. Yet Anaya remained grounded. She used her platform to advocate for underrepresented voices in the business world, stressing the need for change and the importance of embracing diversity. She became a role model for many, showing that true success is measured not by titles or accolades, but by the impact one has on others. As the months turned into years, Anaya's leadership style transformed the company into a beacon of hope and resilience. It became known for its commitment to ethical practices, employee well-being, and community engagement. People, no longer saw the company as just a corporation. It was now viewed as a responsible entity that cared about its employees, clients, and society as a whole. And yet, amidst the accolades and recognition, Anaya never lost sight of her roots. She still took the time to connect with employees, listening to their stories and encouraging them to share their aspirations. She understood that every person in the company, from the janitors to the executives, played a vital role in its success. Her leadership was not about hierarchy. It was about collaboration and unity. Anaya's life outside of work flourished as well. She reconnected with her family, spending quality time with her children who were now adults, pursuing their own dreams. They admired their mother not just for her career accomplishments, but for her unwavering strength and determination together. They often reflected on their journey, acknowledging the struggles they had faced and the triumphs they had achieved as a family. As she looked back on her life, Anaya realized that every hardship had shaped her into the person she was today. Her experiences had taught her the importance of perseverance and empathy. She vowed to continue making a difference not just within the company, but also in her community. Anaya frequently volunteered at local organizations, using her expertise to help those in need. She understood the value of giving back and wanted to ensure that others had the opportunities she once fought for. In the end, Anaya's story became more than just a tale of personal triumph. It became a legacy of hope and empowerment. She proved that change is possible when one dares to challenge the status quo and believes in their ability to make a difference. As the company continued to thrive, Anaya remained a steadfast advocate for equality, justice, and resilience. She had gone from being the overlooked cleaning lady to a respected leader, inspiring countless others to believe in themselves and their potential. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey.